Hi, my name is Tammy Hunter, and today I'd like to talk to you about drawing the skull. Why bother drawing the skull? I hear from a lot of people who can otherwise draw very well, hey, I can't draw people. And what that usually comes down to is they haven't thought much about anatomy. There are other approaches to drawing people other than looking at anatomy, but I found that particularly helpful for myself when I started drawing portraits. Now, the first thing you'll notice when you look at the skull is that you're dealing with essentially a big ball with a big box hanging out right in front of it. So people are basically a big ball with a big box when it comes to looking at the head. The ball is collectively called the cranium. Altogether, these are called the facial bones. We'll go into those in a minute. And in life, all of this acts as one piece, a movable piece, so that you can chew and eat. However, without supporting structures, the jawbone or mandible detaches from the rest of the skull. At the bottom of the temporal bone here, this little bit is the temporal bone. This right here is called the squamous suture. It's actually kind of squishy, which is kind of neat in life. At the bottom right here, you'll see this little indentation that's part of the temporal bone. So that's a mandibular fossa. The mandible actually fits in via this mandibular condyle right here. In some people, these might not be perfectly aligned, and that's why you might be able to pop your jaw. Now, if you look at just the cranium for a second, what you see here in front is the aptly named frontal bone right here. This is called the coronal suture. If you were to kind of cut the body in this plane, it would be the coronal plane. This is called the sagittal suture. If you were to cut the body this way, that would be the sagittal plane. It separates these two side or parietal bones right here. At the back, you'll see the occipital backbone. This is called the lambdoidal suture. In this particular skull, you can see that there are a lot of neat little outgrowths here, and the sutures went kind of nuts, which is kind of interesting. At the bottom of the occipital bone, you see this big hole, foramen magnum, which just means big hole. That's important to know because that's actually where the spinal cord comes out. These two little bumps right here, these two condyles actually articulate or touch the top vertebra, the top neck bone, called C1 or atlas, which is the cranium sits on top of that bone. Now, that's important to know because we put the mandible back on for a second. It'll play. There you go. The neck, when you're drawing a person, is going to be coming right out of this hole. So that's about where the neck is going to be curving back like this. Again, on the side, you have your temporal bone. Here you have your external auditory meatus. Now, that's about where the ear attaches. You can see on the skull, it's about halfway from the front to the back of the skull. But keep in mind, if you're drawing people from life, the nose is going to be out here. So the ear is actually going to be set back from halfway, but it's still very, very good to know. If I were to turn this way, the skull, you can see these two holes right here. These are called the zygomatic arches. Now, that's going to be about where the cheekbone is going to end up. Right about here. So if you're doing a 3/4 view portrait, it's extremely important to take special note of the zygomatic arch. It's actually made up out of 3 bones. This bone right out in front here is called the maxilla. This is the maxillary process of the zygomatic arch. This part is made up out of the temporal bone. That's the temporal process of the zygomatic arch. And then right in the middle, you've got your zygomatic bone, which is just kind of floating out here. Zygomatic arch. Now, in front of the zygomatic arch, you have your top of your palate, your palatal bones, and in front of those, you have your top teeth. If you notice the curve here, you have your forehead and your frontal bone going out. You have these bumps, this slight bump right here, right over the orbit. So that's called the supraorbital ridge. You have your nasal bones, where the curve of the nose is going to start coming out. The actual nose is mostly supported by cartilage, which is why you're not seeing it here. Underneath your nasal cavity, right here, the maxilla starts jutting out towards where the teeth are. Other than the nose, which is extremely important when drawing portraits as well as in and of itself, but other than the nose, if you're doing a profile, looking at these bones becomes extremely important. If I put the mandible back on, you've got your bottom teeth, and then you've got your jaw coming out. Now, in a lot of people, this part dips in from the teeth and then the chin goes back out. That's not true of everybody. There are some people where you're going to see the chin kind of recede back in toward the neck. So that's something to look at when you're drawing someone. Does their chin jut out? Mine also kind of juts out here, or does it recede back in? Another quick point to note. Also, just quickly, if you look again back over the orbits, you see how part of the frontal bone sort of juts out here into supporting the eyes. Does this angle go back in on the person you're drawing, or does it go back out? In some people, this will kind of angle out this way, and some people it will angle in that way. So that's another thing when you're starting to draw portraits that it can help to notice a lot. Again, I can't be a counterexample because mine juts in too. But anyway, I hope that that helps someone who's just starting to draw portraits. It can be a very satisfying thing to do, and it's definitely worth thinking about anatomy and the shape of the skull when doing so. Thank you for watching.